When I was 7 years old, and my sister was 8, our parents finally started letting us go to the park by ourselves. It felt like a huge privilege at the time. The park was only a short walk down the street from our house, right next to a church, so the adults figured it was close enough to be safe. Looking back now, I understand how different their idea of safe enough was, compared to what people might think today. I just want to quietly welcome you to Sleepy Shadows. I know many of you listen to these stories to relax, to slow your thoughts, and gently drift off to sleep. If today felt long or heavy, I hope this story brings you a little comfort. Whenever you feel like it, you can leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight. I always love knowing how far these shadows travel. And if calm, quiet horror stories like this help you unwind, you're always welcome to subscribe. Now, settle back in, take a slow breath, and let the story continue. We didn't live in a nice area. That was just normal to us. The park wasn't some clean playground with bright equipment and soft grass. It was rough around the edges, both literally and figuratively. We were warned about broken beer bottles in the grass, needles hidden in the dirt, and strange people who sometimes slept in the bushes. We were told not to touch anything sharp, not to talk to anyone who looked drunk, and definitely not to poke around anyone who was passed out. Those rules were just part of daily life for us, like looking both ways before crossing the street. There was one warning that stuck with me more than the others. We were told that if a black Lincoln Town car ever slowed down near us and asked for help, we were to run as fast as we could. Adults, we were told, don't ask kids for help unless they want to grab them. That sentence burned itself into my brain. I remember once yelling at a car that slowed down near us, my voice shaking but loud, because I was more stubborn than scared. I was a bold kid, mostly because I didn't fully understand how dangerous things could really be. The park trips were never just about playing. We didn't have much money, so my sister and I had our own little system. When we would crawl through the bushes near the edges of the park, especially close to where people sometimes slept or drank, drunk people drop change. Nickels, dimes, sometimes even quarters would fall out of loose pockets. If you looked carefully enough, you could usually find something. We called it drunk change, and if we found enough, we could go to the convenience store and buy cheap candy. It sounds terrible now, but at the time it felt like treasure hunting. That day started like any other. It was warm, probably summer, because school was out. The church doors were closed and the park was quiet in that dull, heavy way it gets during the middle of the day. My sister and I were crouched low in the bushes, parting branches with our hands, scanning the dirt for coins. I remember the smell of dust and old leaves, and how quiet everything suddenly became. That's when we heard a sound that didn't belong. At first, it was coughing. Deep, painful coughing that sounded like it hurt. Then it turned into something worse. Crying. Not quiet crying, but broken, gasping sobs. A man's voice, shaking and hoarse, pleading over and over again. I couldn't make out the words at first, just the tone. Desperate. Terrified. We froze. Slowly, we followed the sound toward the side of the church. What we saw is something I still remember in painful detail. A young man, probably not very old, maybe in his 20s, was curled up against the church wall. He didn't look much older than a teenager to me, but I was a kid, so my sense of age wasn't great. What I do remember clearly was how badly hurt he was. His face was swollen and cut. Dried blood streaked his cheeks, and fresh tears ran through it, making muddy trails. Dirt clung to his skin and clothes. He was shaking violently, like his body couldn't stop trembling. His clothes were filthy. He wore a blue plaid flannel shirt and black jeans that were so dirty they looked almost brown. There were small cuts everywhere, and one deep wound on his leg that looked especially bad. I remember thinking he must have lost a lot of blood because he looked weak, like he might collapse at any moment. He wasn't even really looking at us. He was facing the wall of the church, pressing himself against it like it could protect him. He kept begging, not to us, but to the wall, apologizing, crying. His words didn't make much sense, but the fear in his voice was unmistakable. My sister reacted faster than I did. She told me to stay with him. She said she was going to get help. I didn't argue. I just nodded, my stomach twisted into knots. Together, before she left, we helped him stand and shuffle closer to the front door of the church. He leaned heavily, barely able to support himself. We hoped the church might be open, that someone would be inside. It wasn't. The doors were locked. The building was quiet. No one was there. My sister ran home, leaving me alone with him. I sat down next to him on the ground. I remember being very careful not to touch him too much. He was bleeding from so many places, and I was scared of hurting him more. I kept telling him that help was coming, over and over again. I don't even know if he could hear me properly. He was in shock. That much was clear, even to a kid. Time passed strangely. It felt long and short at the same time. But he continued to cry, to shake, to apologize to no one in particular. I remember feeling completely helpless. I had never seen an adult man cry like that before. Not openly. Not broken. It shattered something in my head, the idea that adults were always strong. At some point, I realized my sister hadn't come back. I didn't know how long she had been gone. I didn't know what to do. I was too scared to leave him, and too scared to stay. Eventually, an old woman from a divided house on the corner noticed me. She recognized me because I walked past her house often. She didn't recognize the man hunched over by the church. She called the police. When the police arrived, everything happened very quickly. They spoke to me, told me to go home. They helped the man into the back of a police car. I watched him disappear behind the door, still shaking, but still crying. I never saw him again. I later understood, from the bits and pieces I overheard, that a local gang had done that to him. From the way he kept apologizing, it sounded like he had crossed the wrong people, or failed to do something he was supposed to do. He was deep in shock. That much was obvious. The next day, when my sister and I went back to the park, things had changed. The hedges we had crawled through were gone, cut down completely. The lower branches of the pine trees had been chopped off. There were no more hiding places. It was like someone had tried to erase what had happened, to make sure no one could disappear into the bushes again. It took about a week before someone finally sprayed the dried blood off the church wall. For days, it stayed there. A dark reminder that something terrible had happened. We never talked about it again as a family. It was like everyone silently agreed to pretend it didn't exist. But I never forgot. That was the most disturbing thing I experienced as a child. Not because it was supernatural or mysterious, but because it was real. Seeing a grown man completely broken by violence changed the way I saw the world. Gang violence stopped being something abstract. It became personal, human, terrifying. Even now, all these years later, that memory still sits heavy in my mind. It taught me that fear doesn't always come from shadows or stories. Sometimes it comes from real people, real pain, and the silence that follows. When I was around 12 years old, I had one of those experiences that stays with you no matter how much time passes. Even now, years later, I can still remember every sound, every feeling, and the way my stomach dropped when I realized something was very wrong. At the time, I didn't think of it as anything supernatural or dramatic. I just knew I was scared in a way I had never been scared before. That day started like a lot of days did back then. I was home alone after school. Both of my parents were at work, and it wasn't unusual for me to be by myself for a few hours. I wasn't the kind of kid who panicked easily about being alone. I actually liked it most of the time. I could watch whatever I wanted, play video games, and not worry about anyone telling me to turn the volume down or do homework right away. And the only company I had in the house was my dog, Bentley. He was a golden doodle, big and fluffy, and honestly one of the best dogs you could ask for. He followed me everywhere and usually stayed close, especially when no one else was home. Having him around made me feel safe, like even if something strange happened, he would know before I did. Our house had a finished basement where I spent a lot of time. That was where the game console was set up, and it was basically my little hangout spot. The basement stairs went down from the first floor, and at the bottom of those stairs were these heavy double doors. They weren't normal doors. They were thick, solid, and when they closed, they made a very loud, very specific sound. You could hear it anywhere in the house. There was no mistaking it for anything else. If those doors slammed shut, or you knew it. Earlier that day, I had gone downstairs to play video games. I remember clearly that I left the double doors open. I always did. I didn't like them closed because the basement felt more open and less closed in that way. Bentley followed me down, laid on the floor for a bit, then wandered back upstairs at some point. After a while, I got bored of the games and went upstairs myself to watch TV on the first floor. I was sitting there, half paying attention to whatever show was on, when I heard it. The double doors slammed shut. It was loud, sharp, sudden. There was no mistaking that sound. My heart jumped immediately. I sat there for a second, frozen, replaying it in my head. I knew for a fact those doors had been open. There was no draft strong enough to close them, and even if there was, they didn't gently swing shut, but they slammed. Hard. Bentley lifted his head right away, his ears perked up, and he stared toward the basement stairs. That alone made me more uneasy. If it had just been a random noise, he probably wouldn't have reacted. But he was alert, focused, and clearly aware something had happened. At first I tried to explain it away. Maybe I remembered wrong. Maybe I had closed the doors without thinking. Maybe something shifted and caused them to shut. But the more I thought about it, the less those explanations made sense. Curiosity started to fight with fear. I wanted to know what had happened. I needed to know. Sitting there wondering felt worse than going to check. So I did what my 12-year-old brain thought was logical. I grabbed my airsoft gun. It sounds ridiculous now, but at the time it felt like the best option. It wasn't a real weapon, obviously, but it made me feel like I wasn't completely defenseless. Holding it gave me just enough confidence to move. Bentley stayed right next to me as I walked toward the basement stairs. I remember moving slowly, trying to be quiet, listening for any other sounds. The house felt different suddenly. Too quiet. Every little creak made me tense up. I reached the top of the stairs and carefully leaned around the corner to look down. From where I stood, I could see the bottom of the stairs and the double doors. They were closed. That's when the fear really hit. I stood there staring at them, my mind racing. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my chest. I remember thinking about how heavy those doors were and how hard they had slammed. There was no way that happened by accident, as Bentley let out a low sound. Not quite a growl, but enough to tell me he was uneasy too. He stayed close to my leg, but he didn't back away. I took a deep breath and started down the stairs. Each step felt slow and deliberate. I was gripping the airsoft gun tightly, my hands slightly sweaty. I kept telling myself that it was probably nothing, that I was overreacting, but my body didn't believe that at all. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, I stood in front of the double doors. They loomed there, closed and silent, like they were hiding something behind them. I hesitated for a few seconds, listening. There was no sound coming from the other side. Then I kicked the doors open. They swung wide with a loud bang, and Bentley immediately ran inside, sniffing the ground and moving quickly around the room. He didn't bark or growl, but he was alert, checking corners, acting like he was searching for something. I stayed near the doorway at first, watching him. After about 30 seconds, when nothing jumped out and Bentley seemed calmer, I stepped inside too. The basement looked normal at first glance. The couch was where it always was. The shelves hadn't been disturbed. Nothing seemed out of place. My breathing started to slow just a little. Then I noticed the window. In the back corner of the basement, there was a large window. It wasn't a regular window. It was low to the ground and had one of those ladder-style steps leading up to ground level outside. That window was always closed. Always. It was wide open. My stomach dropped instantly. Cold air was coming in from outside, and the curtain moved slightly with the breeze. But Bentley walked over to it and sniffed around, tail stiff. That was all the confirmation I needed. Someone had been there. I didn't touch anything. I backed away slowly, my heart racing again, and ran upstairs with Bentley right behind me. I locked myself in the living room and grabbed the phone to call my mom. My voice was shaking as I tried to explain what had happened. She stayed calm, asked me questions, and told me to go to a safe room and lock the door. She called the police right away. Waiting for them felt like forever. Every sound made me jump. Bentley stayed pressed against me the whole time, and I remember holding onto his collar like he was an anchor. When the police arrived, they searched the house and the yard. They checked the window, the basement, and the surrounding area. They told us it looked like someone had either broken in or tried to. There were no clear signs of who it was or where they went, but the open window and closed doors pointed strongly to an intruder. Nothing was stolen. Nothing was damaged. That somehow made it even worse. After that, my parents didn't take any chances. They had security cameras installed around the house and changed some of the locks. I wasn't left home alone as much for a while. Even though nothing like that ever happened again, the feeling stuck with me. That sense of being watched, that realization that someone could be in your house without you knowing. It changed the way I thought about safety and about being alone. Looking back now, I still don't know who it was or what they wanted. Maybe it really was just an intruder who panicked and left when they heard movement upstairs. Maybe it was someone who thought the house was empty. I'll never know. What I do know is that moment, hearing those doors slam shut, was the first time I truly understood fear. Not the kind you feel during a scary movie, but the kind that makes your body react before your mind can catch up. And every time I hear a door slam unexpectedly, even now, my heart still skips a beat. I used to be the kind of person who never really believed in anything paranormal. Ghosts, shadows, strange encounters, all of that stuff felt like stories people told when they were tired, scared, or letting their imagination run too wild. I always thought there was a logical explanation for everything, even if it wasn't obvious at first. That belief stayed with me for most of my childhood, until two very specific experiences happened when I was a teenager. Those moments completely changed how I see the world, and to this day, they are the reason I no longer dismiss the idea that something exists beyond what we can easily explain. The first experience happened when I was 14 years old. At the time, my bedroom was on the second floor of our house. It wasn't a huge house, but the layout was very important, especially for what happened that night. My parents' bedroom was also on the second floor, directly across from my room. If I opened my bedroom door and stepped into the hallway, I would be facing straight toward their bedroom door. To my right, the hallway led directly to the staircase that went down to the ground floor. My dad had a habit of sleeping downstairs on the couch fairly often. My parents owned a heated waterbed, and my dad hated how hot it got at night. He was the kind of person who overheated easily, so instead of dealing with the uncomfortable heat, he would grab a blanket and sleep on the couch in the living room. This was a completely normal thing in our house, and none of us ever thought twice about it. At the bottom of the stairs was the living room. From there, if you turned left, you would walk through the dining room. From the dining room, you could either go straight into the kitchen or turn left again into a short, narrow hallway. That hallway led directly to the bathroom. Across from the bathroom door was our front door, which had a large glass panel. At night, that glass would reflect whatever light was on inside the house. We always left a small light on downstairs at night. It wasn't bright, just enough to see where you were going if you needed to get up to use the bathroom. That light had been there for as long as I could remember, so waking up at night and going downstairs was something I had done many times before without any fear. One night, around 3 a.m, I woke up with a strong need to use the bathroom. I was half asleep, my eyes heavy, my brain still foggy from dreaming. Without really thinking about it, I got out of bed and quietly opened my bedroom door. The house was completely silent, the kind of silence that feels thick and heavy in the middle of the night. I walked down the hallway and started down the stairs. I remember holding on to the railing, taking slow steps so I wouldn't make too much noise. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, I turned slightly to head toward the bathroom hallway. That was when I noticed something strange. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement reflected in the glass of the front door. Because the bathroom was directly across from it, the reflection was clear enough to see shapes and motion. In that reflection, I saw my dad walking out of the bathroom. It looked completely normal at first. He was moving slowly, just like he always did when he woke up in the middle of the night. My dad was never a cheerful person when he was half asleep. He was groggy, grumpy, and usually annoyed by everything until he fully woke up. The hallway was narrow, and there wasn't much room to pass someone comfortably. I didn't want to squeeze past him and risk getting snapped at, so I decided to wait. I sat down on the bottom step of the staircase and figured I'd let him walk back to the couch first. My head felt heavy, my thoughts slow. Everything about that moment felt ordinary, but then something felt off. A few seconds passed, and I realized that my dad hadn't walked past me yet. I should have seen him cross the living room to get back to the couch. The space was small enough that there was no way I could have missed it. Before I could fully process that thought, I heard a sound that made my stomach drop. I heard my dad snoring. The sound was coming from the couch in the living room, just a few feet away from where I was sitting. It wasn't faint or distant. It was the deep, steady snore I had heard 1,000 times before. My body went cold. I sat there frozen, my heart pounding in my chest. My brain struggled to catch up with what was happening. If my dad was asleep on the couch, then who or what had I just seen in the reflection walking out of the bathroom? I didn't wait to find out. Fear hit me all at once, sharp and overwhelming. I jumped up from the step and ran back up the stairs as quietly and as fast as I could. I didn't look behind me. I didn't slow down. I reached my bedroom, slammed the door shut, and locked it. I crawled back into bed, and pulling the covers over my head like that could somehow protect me. I remember thinking that I would rather risk wetting the bed than go back downstairs. There was no chance I was going anywhere near that bathroom again that night. The next morning, I told my parents what had happened. I explained everything in detail, from the reflection to the snoring. My parents listened, but neither of them seemed particularly concerned. They told me I must have been half asleep and let my imagination get the best of me. They said reflections can play tricks on your eyes, especially when you're tired. I wanted to believe them. Over the next few weeks, though, little things kept happening. Strange noises at night, sounds that didn't quite make sense. The feeling of being watched when I was alone. I didn't see anything as clear as that first incident, but the house didn't feel the same anymore. Still, I tried to brush it off. I didn't want to be scared of my own home. A couple of months later, another experience happened, one that I still can't explain no matter how hard I try. By that time, I was 15 years old. One evening, I was sitting at the family computer in the living room. It was around 8 at night. My dad was working late, so it was just my mom and me in the house. My mom was upstairs cleaning, moving from room to room with the vacuum. I was on YouTube, listening to music and doing whatever teenagers did online at the time. I was wearing over-the-ear headphones, but I didn't like being completely unaware of what was happening around me. I always felt uncomfortable not being able to hear anything. So I kept one ear uncovered by turning one side of the headphone slightly outward. The living room lights were mounted on the ceiling and were very bright. Because of where the computer desk was positioned, anyone who stood behind me would cast a noticeable shadow across the computer screen. This had happened countless times before. My mom loved to walk up behind me and look over my shoulder at what I was doing, mostly just to annoy me. As I sat there, focused on the screen, I faintly heard the vacuum shut off upstairs. Almost immediately after that, I heard something else that felt very familiar. I heard the soft brushing sound of jean cuffs against the carpet, the sound of someone walking up behind me. Then the screen darkened slightly as a shadow fell across it. Without thinking much of it, I assumed it was my mom. Annoyed, I pulled my headphones off and turned around, ready to ask her what she wanted. No one was there. The space behind me was completely empty. My heart skipped. I quickly looked around the living room, confused. There was nowhere for someone to hide. Panic started to rise in my chest. I yelled out, calling for my mom. She answered from upstairs. Her voice came from far away, nowhere near me. I didn't hesitate. I ran upstairs as fast as I could, my heart pounding harder with every step. When I reached her, I demanded to know why she had turned off the vacuum and come downstairs without saying anything. She looked at me like I was crazy. She told me she hadn't turned the vacuum off at all. While she was cleaning, the new belt inside the vacuum had suddenly snapped. The vacuum started smoking, and it shut off on its own, when the timing matched exactly with when I heard footsteps and felt someone standing behind me. There was no explanation for the shadow. No explanation for the sound of someone walking up behind me. No explanation for the feeling that someone had been there when no one actually was. That moment scared me more than anything else I had ever experienced. There was no reflection to blame, no tiredness, no half-asleep excuse. I was wide awake. I knew what I heard. I knew what I felt. After that night, I stopped pretending that everything had a simple explanation. I stopped laughing off paranormal stories. Those 2 moments stayed with me, clear and sharp in my memory. Even now, years later, I can still feel the fear, the confusion, and the cold realization that something in that house was not right. I don't know what I saw or what stood behind me that night. I don't know if it was a ghost, a presence, or something else entirely. All I know is that after those experiences, I was never able to see the world the same way again. Sorry to interrupt for just a moment. If you're new here, I'd appreciate it if you subscribe to Sleepy Shadows for daily calm horror stories made for late nights and sleep. You can also turn on notifications so you don't miss a new story when the night gets quiet and the shadows return. Now, let's continue. Back in high school, there was a time when I spent almost every single day at my friend John's house. It became such a normal part of my routine that I barely even thought about it. After school, I would head straight over, sometimes staying until late at night, sometimes just hanging out for a few hours. His house felt familiar quickly, like a second home, and at first, nothing about it seemed strange or unsettling. It was just another place where two teenagers wasted time, talked about life, played games, and tried to forget about school and responsibilities. But not long after I started spending time there regularly, I began noticing small things that didn't sit right with me. At first, they were easy to ignore. Sometimes, when the house was quiet, I would hear footsteps coming from another room. I would assume it was John moving around, or maybe someone else in the house. But then I would realize that John was sitting right next to me, completely still, just as confused as I was. Other times, I would catch glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye. It looked like the shadow of a person passing through a doorway or standing briefly in a hallway. Every time I turned my head to look directly at it, there would be nothing there. No person. No movement. Just empty space. I told myself it was my imagination. Shadows can play tricks on you, especially when the lighting isn't perfect, and I didn't want to sound paranoid. As the days went by, those moments became more frequent. It wasn't just once in a while anymore. Almost every time I was at John's house, I noticed something. A shadow that disappeared too quickly, on footsteps that had no clear source. The strange feeling that someone else was there, watching us, even though we were supposedly alone. Still, I kept my mouth shut. I didn't want to freak myself out or make things awkward. After about a month of this, I finally decided to say something. One afternoon, while we were just sitting around, I casually mentioned that I had been noticing some strange things in his house. I didn't go into detail at first. I just said I had heard footsteps and seen shadows now and then. The reaction I got was not what I expected. John got angry almost immediately. His mood changed in a second, and he demanded to know who had told me about the shadow people. He was genuinely upset, not joking at all. He insisted that someone must have been messing with me, feeding me ideas, and he begged me to stop joking about it. But he looked scared, even though he was trying to hide it behind anger. I was confused. I told him no one had told me anything. I explained that I was being completely serious, and that I was only describing what I personally had seen and heard in his house. That didn't seem to make him feel any better. If anything, it made him more uneasy. After that conversation, things escalated. It wasn't just footsteps and shadows anymore. We started hearing laughter when no one else was home. It wasn't loud or clear enough to recognize, but it was unmistakable. A soft laugh, distant, like it was coming from another room. Doors would open and close on their own, slowly or suddenly, without any breeze or explanation. Sometimes we would be watching TV when it would turn itself off. Other times, it would turn on by itself, the screen lighting up the room without anyone touching the remote. Each time something happened, we would look at each other, silently asking the same question without saying it out loud. What is happening here? As the days passed, these events became more intense and more frequent. It started to feel like whatever was in the house was becoming more comfortable, more active, or more aware of us. The air felt heavy, like the house itself was tense. Even when nothing was happening, the silence felt wrong. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. One day, after another strange incident, I suggested that maybe we should bless the house. I didn't even finish the sentence before something happened that still makes my stomach turn when I think about it. Right as the words left my mouth, a box sitting on a nearby counter suddenly flew off and came straight at me. It didn't slide. It didn't fall. It was thrown with force, as if someone had picked it up and hurled it across the room. I barely had time to react. My heart jumped into my throat, and I stumbled backward, completely frozen in shock. John looked just as terrified as I felt. There was no denying it anymore. That moment erased any doubt, any attempt to explain things away logically. It sounds unbelievable when I say it out loud, and I know how it sounds to anyone hearing the story for the first time. But I know what happened. That moment was the single most terrifying experience of my life. Neither of us wanted to stay in that house any longer than necessary. As soon as we could, we got holy water. We didn't know exactly what we were doing, but we did what felt right at the time. We sprinkled the holy water around the house, moving from room to room, saying a prayer as we went. We didn't joke. We didn't laugh. We were completely serious. After that, everything stopped. No more footsteps, no more shadows, no laughter, no moving objects. The house felt normal again, like whatever had been there was gone. We were shaken, but relieved. For the first time in a long while, we felt safe there. Months later, John came to stay with me for a weekend at my family's lake house. It was supposed to be a relaxing break, a chance to get away and forget about everything that had happened. At first, everything was fine. The house was quiet, peaceful, and familiar to me. At one point during the night, though, both of us thought we saw something. A shadow, just for a moment. But we looked at each other but decided not to say anything. We didn't want to bring that fear back into our minds. We told ourselves it was nothing and tried to ignore it. Later that night, I woke up to the sound of voices coming from the living room. They weren't loud, but they were clear enough to know they weren't part of a dream. I froze in bed, listening. John woke up too. He decided to go check it out, thinking maybe someone had broken into the house. I stayed where I was, my heart pounding, too afraid to move. A few moments after he left the room, I heard the sound of someone running down the hallway. Heavy footsteps, fast and loud, like someone was trying to escape. I jumped out of bed and ran out, thinking John was running back toward me, but he wasn't there. The hallway was empty. I rushed outside and found John standing on the porch, looking just as scared as I felt. He told me he had heard a loud noise from inside the house and thought it had been me running around. We stood there for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. Nothing else happened for the rest of the weekend. The house stayed quiet, and we tried to convince ourselves that maybe stress and lack of sleep had gotten the best of us. A week later, I returned to the lake house alone. It had been empty the entire time. When I walked inside, something immediately felt wrong. One of the picture frames that had been hanging on the wall was no longer there. I found it down the hallway, my photo still inside it, as if it had been ripped off the wall and thrown. In the living room, the pillows from the couch had been stacked neatly on top of each other, right in the center of the couch. No one had been there. No one could have done it. After that, I stopped hanging out with John. Not because of him, but because everything connected to him, and those experiences felt wrong. Since then, I have never experienced anything like that again, and I hope I never do. Those moments changed me. They left a mark that never fully faded. Even now, years later, I still think about them and wonder what followed us, what stayed behind, and what would have happened if we hadn't done anything to stop it. When I was about 13 years old, I spent a lot of time at my best friend's house. He lived directly across the street from me, which made it incredibly easy to go back and forth whenever we wanted. It didn't really matter what time of day it was, or even what time at night. One of the nicest parts about it was that his dad and stepmom were very close friends with my dad, so nobody ever questioned why I was there so often. I didn't need permission or planning. I would just walk out my front door, cross the street, and be at his house within minutes. Almost every day after school, I would head over there. We would sit in his room or the living room and play GameCube for hours, talk about random stuff, or just hang out doing nothing. Sometimes I stayed until late at night. Other times, I would just end up sleeping over without even meaning to. It felt safe and normal, like a second home. One night, though, something happened that changed everything for me. It was around 2 in the morning. I had been at my house for a bit and decided I wanted to go back over to my friend's place. Like always, I didn't think much of it. I walked out of my front door, and the night air immediately hit me. In front of my house was a dirt field that was mostly covered in weeds. It wasn't a clean yard or anything nice to look at, just an open patch of rough ground between houses. As I started walking across, I suddenly felt a chill run through my entire body. Goosebumps covered my arms, even though it wasn't particularly cold outside. At the time, I brushed it off. I told myself it was just the night air or my imagination. I kept walking. After maybe 20 steps or so, something caught my attention. I glanced over toward the field and froze. Standing near my neighbor's fence was what looked like the silhouette of a person. It was dark, solid, and unmistakably shaped like someone standing there. My heart immediately started racing. The figure wasn't moving. It looked like it was leaning against the fence, almost casually, as if someone were just standing there watching. Fear hit me hard, but instead of reacting normally, I panicked internally and tried to pretend I didn't see it. I told myself not to look suspicious, not to run, not to draw attention to myself. I kept walking forward, forcing myself to act normal. After another 10 feet or so, I looked over again. That was when everything changed. The silhouette was no longer just dark. It was glowing. A bright, intense white light surrounded it, so strong that it almost hurt my eyes to look at. I didn't understand what I was seeing, and I still don't. But something strange happened inside me. Instead of feeling the urge to run, I felt drawn toward it. It was like my body wasn't fully under my control anymore. Without realizing it at first, I changed the direction I was walking. I was no longer heading toward my friend's house. I was walking straight toward that glowing figure. I took about 15 steps closer. Then I heard it. A deep, terrifying laugh echoed through the night. It didn't sound human. It was low, heavy, and filled with something that made my stomach drop instantly. The moment I heard it, the glowing silhouette began to change shape. The light flickered, warped, and twisted. That was when I snapped out of whatever trance I had been in. I swear on my life, I saw horns forming on its head. The fear that hit me was unlike anything I had ever felt before. Tears filled my eyes instantly. My chest felt tight, and I couldn't breathe properly. Pure panic took over, and I turned and sprinted as fast as I could toward my friend's house. I could hear something behind me. Footsteps, fast, heavy. It sounded like whatever I had seen was chasing me. I didn't dare turn around at first, but fear forced me to glance back after a couple of seconds. There was nothing there. But when I turned forward again, my heart nearly stopped. The silhouette was now standing in front of my friend's house, staring directly into one of the windows. It let out the same horrible laugh as before. I felt completely trapped. I didn't know where to go or what to do. Then I remembered something. My friend's parents had a strange habit of leaving their garage door opener inside their car, under the seat. I never understood why they did this, but in that moment, it felt like my only option. I ran straight to their car, yanked open the door, and grabbed the opener. As the garage door began to lift, I heard panting behind me. Loud, heavy breathing. The footsteps were getting closer and closer. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely press the button. I dropped to the ground and tried to slide under the garage door while it was still opening. That was when something grabbed me. At least it felt like it did. I screamed at the top of my lungs, convinced that I was about to die. My entire body went rigid with fear. And then, suddenly, I saw there was a bright flash of light. I looked up and saw what I can only describe as an angel, or something that looked like one, standing in the lot next to my house. The light was overwhelming but comforting. Unlike before, I didn't feel fear. I felt calm, completely calm. The dark presence was gone. I didn't stay there to question it. I scrambled to my feet, slammed the garage door button again, and ran inside. My legs felt weak, but somehow I made it. When I told my friend what had happened, I expected him to laugh at me or call me crazy. Instead, he went quiet. Then he told me something that made my blood run cold. He said he had seen things too. For months, he had been seeing strange shapes and silhouettes in my lot at night, and sometimes outside his window. He told me that whenever he saw them, he would freeze, close his eyes, and wait for them to go away. The way he described them sounded exactly like what I had seen. Not even 2 hours later, we were sitting in his room watching a movie when we heard scratching behind us. Slowly, we turned around. There it was. The same silhouette, the same shape, the same presence. My friend whispered, telling me not to move. I trusted him completely. I whispered back that this was the same thing I had seen earlier. He told me it was the same thing he had been seeing for months. We sat there frozen as it stared at us. Then it slammed against the glass. We lost it. We ran into the living room, screaming and shaking, not knowing what else to do. My friend broke down crying, convinced it was after us, and that we were going to die. The fear in his voice was real and uncontrollable. Suddenly, the silhouette appeared in the hallway leading to the living room. We screamed for his parents and dove under the blankets on the couch, hiding like terrified children. After what felt like forever, his dad came out and asked what was going on, telling us it was almost 5 a.m. When we explained everything, he brushed it off as imagination. About a month later, my friend called me around 2 a.m, panicking. He said he saw black figures walking around my house. I woke my dad, convinced someone was outside. He checked and found nothing. But when I went back to my room, I saw 2 silhouettes standing just outside my window. I was terrified. While this was happening, my friend was still on the phone. Suddenly, he started screaming for his parents. When he came back on the line, he told me he thought they were inside his house. I could hear banging on his door through the phone. A couple minutes later, his parents came in, and it stopped. A week later, they moved out of that house without explanation. Years later, we moved into that same house. My dad bought it because it was bigger and cheap, and eventually gave it to me. When I told my friend that I was seeing silhouettes again, he finally told me everything. He said there had been black outlines of people all around the house. His parents knew, but never told him. He described feeling hands on his shoulders, something pulling at his feet, like it was trying to drag him into the floor. Every time his parents entered the room, it stopped. To this day, I still see silhouettes sometimes. I don't know if it's my mind or something else, but it still scares me deeply. I don't know what we saw that night, and I may never know. I just wanted to share what happened, because those experiences changed me forever. When I was a freshman in high school, something happened that completely changed the way I think about dreams, signs, and whether people who have passed away can still reach us in some way. Before this, I had never thought much about things like that. Dreams were just dreams to me, random images your brain created while you slept. Death felt final and distant, especially when it involved people you never actually met. That all changed because of one short dream and what followed afterwards. At that time, my mom had a very close friend. They had known each other for years, and their friendship went deeper than casual conversations or holiday cards. This woman had been through more hardship than most people I knew. I'll call her M. Life had never been easy for her, and it seemed like every time she finally found some peace, something else was taken away. Years before, M's first husband had died from cancer. It wasn't sudden. It was a long, painful process that took a toll on her emotionally and mentally. On top of that, she had grown up in a difficult home environment, so loss and struggle were things she had known for most of her life. Despite everything, she managed to keep going and eventually found happiness again. She had recently gotten engaged to a new man, who I'll call B. From what my mom told me, he was kind, supportive, and made M genuinely happy. My mom was excited for her, happy that after everything she had been through, she finally had something good in her life again. Then tragedy struck again. M's father was killed while crossing the street on his way to church. It was sudden and unexpected. One moment he was alive, following his normal routine, and the next, he was gone. The loss devastated. It felt cruel and unfair, like life was piling one tragedy on top of another. My mom decided she was going to attend the funeral. She felt it was important to be there for her friend, to offer support and comfort during such a painful time. Despite the sadness of the situation, my mom was also excited in a strange way. She had never met M's fiancé in person before, and she was looking forward to finally meeting B and seeing the man who had brought some happiness back into her friend's life. The night before the funeral, I went to sleep like any other night. Nothing felt strange or unusual. I wasn't thinking about M, the funeral, or anything particularly emotional. I was just a normal high school kid, focused on school, friends, and everyday life. That night, I had a dream that felt different from any dream I had ever had before. In the dream, I was standing outside, and it was raining heavily. Not a light drizzle, but a steady, soaking rain. Everything felt quiet and calm despite the rain. Then I saw my grandfather. I had never met him in real life. He had died 2 years before I was born, so I only knew what he looked like from old photos and stories my family told. But in the dream, I knew exactly who he was. There was no confusion, no doubt. It felt natural, like recognizing someone you somehow knew even without ever meeting them. He was calm and gentle. There was no fear in the dream, no sense of danger or urgency in the way you usually feel during nightmares. He spoke to me plainly and briefly, as if he didn't have much time. He told me to tell my mom hello. Then he said something else that immediately caught my attention. He told me that my mom needed to mention a plane crash to M. He didn't explain why. He didn't go into detail. He just made it very clear that this was important, and that I needed to make sure my mom heard it. The entire conversation was short. He didn't linger. But there was something about the way he spoke that made it feel serious, like this wasn't just a random dream. Before I could ask questions or understand more, the dream ended. I woke up feeling unsettled. I lay in bed thinking about it for a while, replaying it over and over in my head. It didn't feel like a normal dream. It felt focused, almost intentional. The message was simple, direct, and specific. That alone made it strange. Still, I didn't want to jump to conclusions. I told myself it was probably just my imagination mixing together stories I had heard, family memories, and random thoughts. But the feeling that I needed to tell my mom wouldn't go away. The next morning was the day of the funeral. My mom was getting ready to leave, dressed in black, moving quietly through the house. Right before she walked out the door, I stopped her. I told her about the dream. I explained everything, from seeing my grandfather in the rain to the strange message about telling her to say hello and to mention a plane crash to M. As I was saying it out loud, it even sounded strange to me. I half expected her to laugh or brush it off completely. She looked at me with a confused expression. She didn't seem angry, just puzzled. She told me it was probably just a weird dream or an odd coincidence. She didn't think much of it beyond that. Still, she listened, nodded, and then left for the funeral. The funeral itself went smoothly. My mom came home later that day and said everything had gone well, considering the circumstances. She met M's fiancé, B, and thought he seemed like a wonderful person. Nothing about a plane crash came up. Nothing unusual happened. Life moved on. I slowly pushed the dream to the back of my mind. About a week passed. One day my mom called me into the room. I could tell something was wrong immediately. Her face was pale, and her voice sounded shaky. She looked like she had just seen a ghost. She told me that M had just called her. B was dead. He had been killed in a private plane crash in Canada. For a moment, I didn't even know what to say. The words didn't register right away. My stomach dropped, and my chest felt tight. My mom looked at me with wide eyes, clearly shaken. Then she said something I'll never forget. She reminded me of the dream. She told me that the moment M mentioned the plane crash, her mind went straight back to what I had told her that morning before the funeral. She said she had chills all over her body and felt sick to her stomach. The coincidence was too specific, too exact. A plane crash, not a car accident, not an illness, not some vague tragedy. A private plane crash, exactly like what had been mentioned in my dream before anyone could have known. I felt a mix of emotions all at once. Shock, fear, sadness for M, confusion about how something like that could even be possible. I had never believed that dreams could carry messages like that. I had never believed that someone who died before I was born could reach out to me in any way. But there was no logical explanation that made sense. I hadn't overheard anything. I didn't know anything about B's travel plans. No one in my family owned a plane or talked about aviation. There was no reason for my brain to randomly create that exact scenario. What disturbed me the most was how urgent the message felt in the dream. The way my grandfather had spoken, as if it was important that the message be delivered, even if no one understood it at the time. After that, I started questioning everything I thought I knew about reality, about dreams, about death, about whether people we lose are truly gone, or if they can still watch over us in ways we don't understand. I also couldn't stop thinking about me. My heart broke for her, but in such a short span of time, she had lost her father and her fiancé. It felt unbelievably cruel. The idea that a warning might have existed but couldn't change anything made it even harder to process. To this day, I don't know why I was shown that dream. I don't know why I was chosen to receive that message or what purpose it served. Maybe it was just meant to prepare my mom emotionally. Maybe it was meant to remind us that life is fragile. Or maybe there are things happening around us that we simply don't have the ability to fully understand. I've never had another dream like that since. Nothing that clear, nothing that specific, nothing that came true in such a devastating way. But that experience stayed with me. Even now, years later, I still think about it. I still remember the sound of the rain in that dream, the calm in my grandfather's voice, and the way he looked at me like he knew exactly what was going to happen. I don't know if it was a message, a warning, or something else entirely. All I know is that after that moment, I stopped dismissing things so easily. Some experiences stay with you forever, not because they are loud or dramatic, but because they quietly change how you see the world. And that dream did exactly that. This happened when I was 8 years old, back when my family lived out in the country. It wasn't the kind of place with nearby houses or busy streets. Everything was spaced out, quiet, and dark at night. We had one neighbor who lived directly beside us, but even his house wasn't close. Our properties were separated by a thin line of trees, just enough to block a clear view, but not enough to feel comforting. Other than him, the nearest neighbors were about 2 kilometers away in any direction. Once the sun went down, it felt like the world around us disappeared. The darkness at night was something I wasn't used to at that age. There were no streetlights on our road at all, which made nighttime feel even heavier. The only light you could see outside after dark came from our neighbor's yard. He had a single street lamp installed near his house, and it stood out like a lone beacon in the middle of nowhere. It was on a timer, and every night, like clockwork, it would turn on around 8 in the evening and stay on until about 1 in the morning. That light alone used to scare me when I was a kid. My bedroom window faced in that direction, and the light shined straight through it. The thin line of trees between our properties didn't block much. Instead, they created long, stretched-out shadows that moved slightly whenever the wind blew. Those shadows would crawl across my bedroom walls and ceiling. Sometimes they didn't bother me at all. Other nights, they made my heart race. But no matter how scary they felt, I always knew they were just shadows from the trees and the light outside. I could explain them, and that made them easier to handle. That night was different. I remember being wide awake in my bed, unable to fall asleep. I was tossing and turning, pulling my blankets tighter, then pushing them away again. Everything felt off, but I couldn't explain why. The house was completely quiet. No voices, no footsteps, just the soft sounds of the night outside, insects and distant noises I couldn't quite place. Eventually, I rolled onto my back and stared up at the ceiling, hoping I would get tired enough to fall asleep. That was when I saw it. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. There was a shape on the ceiling, made entirely of light. It wasn't bright like a lamp or flashlight, but it was clearly visible against the darkness. As my eyes adjusted, the shape became clearer, and my stomach dropped. It looked like a face. Not a detailed or realistic face, but a crude one, like a rough outline made of shadow and light. You could make out where the eyes were, the nose and the mouth. It wasn't smiling. It wasn't moving. It was just there, staring down at me from the ceiling. My first thought was that it had to be the street lamp again. I told myself it was just another shadow, another trick of the light coming through my window. But something felt wrong about that explanation. The shape was too clear, too intentional. I turned my head slowly and looked out the window. There was no light. The neighbor's street lamp was off. The road outside was completely dark. I glanced at my clock, my heart pounding as I read the time. It was 2 in the morning. That meant the light had been off for at least an hour. I looked back at the ceiling. The face was still there. I stared at it for what felt like a very long time. I don't know exactly how long it was. Minutes? Longer? Time felt strange in that moment. The longer I stared, the more scared I became. My chest felt tight, and my throat felt dry. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. It was like my eyes were locked onto it. My mind started racing. I tried to convince myself it wasn't real. I tried to find shapes in it that didn't make sense, hoping it would fall apart into randomness. But no matter how hard I tried, I kept seeing the same face. Eventually, the fear became too much for me to handle on my own. I called out for my mom. My voice shook as I did, and when she didn't answer right away, I started screaming. I was an irrational little kid, terrified beyond reason, and all I could think about was getting her into the room. And when she finally rushed in, I immediately told her not to turn on the light. I begged her to look at the ceiling first. I pointed upward, my heart pounding as I stared at the face, waiting for her to see it too. But she didn't. She stood there, confused, looking exactly where I was pointing. She told me she couldn't see anything at all. She said the room was pitch black and that there was nothing on the ceiling. She tried to calm me down, telling me it was just my imagination and that I needed to go back to sleep. I didn't understand how she couldn't see it. It was right there, clear as day to me. Eventually, she turned on the light anyway. The moment the room filled with light, the face vanished. There was nothing left on the ceiling, just plain white paint. My mom tucked me back in and stayed with me for a bit until I calmed down enough to fall asleep. After that night, I didn't see the face again, but I never forgot it. Years passed. When I was 14, we moved out of that house. Life moved on, and the memory of that night faded into something distant, something strange that I didn't bring up very often. Part of me had convinced myself that maybe it really was just a childhood fear, a trick of my imagination combined with darkness and shadows. One day, after we had been gone from the house for a while, the topic came up in conversation. I told my mom and my sister about that night. I explained what I had seen, how scared I had been, and how real it felt to me at the time. They didn't believe me. They laughed it off gently, saying kids see things, especially in the dark. But they told me I probably just had a nightmare or confused shadows with something else. I felt frustrated, because I knew what I had seen, but I didn't have any way to prove it. Then I decided to do something. I grabbed a piece of paper and drew the face. I didn't overthink it. I just drew what I remembered. The shape, the way the features were placed, the overall feeling of it. When I finished, I handed the drawing to my mom. The moment she looked at it, her expression changed. She went completely pale. Her eyes widened, and she just stared at the paper in silence. The room felt suddenly heavy. My sister noticed it too and asked what was wrong. That was when my mom told us something she had never shared before. While we lived in that house, she had dreams. Not once or twice, but regularly. At least once a week. In those dreams, well, she saw that same face, the exact same one I had just drawn. She said the dreams terrified her, but she never talked about them because she didn't want to scare us. Hearing that sent chills through my entire body. I hadn't known about her dreams. She hadn't known about my experience until years later. And yet we both had seen the same thing. The same face, in the same house. That realization scared me more than the night itself ever had. To this day, I don't know what it was. I don't know if it was something supernatural, some shared psychological response to the environment, or something else entirely. All I know is that it was real to me, and it clearly was real to my mom too. Even now, thinking about it makes my skin crawl. Some memories never leave you, and some experiences stay with you, not because they were loud or dramatic, but because they connect in ways you can't explain. That face is one of those things.